Have you ever considered that the place where your rosary rests at night could influence not only your sleep, but the spiritual atmosphere of your entire home? Most Catholics pray and then, almost unconsciously, leave their rosary wherever it is convenient, on a nightstand, tucked into a drawer, or sometimes even on a chair. Few stop to think that such a small act could carry profound spiritual consequences. Yet, according to Padre Pio, the revered mystic and saint whose life was steeped in prayer, suffering, and divine encounters, there is a sacred way to care for the rosary that transforms it from a simple devotional tool into a vessel of grace. He observed throughout his life that where this small, humble instrument of prayer is placed during the night can have far-reaching effects on the soul, the household, and even the unseen spiritual realms surrounding us. This teaching is not new. It echoes a long-standing tradition within the Church, one that spans centuries and has been passed down quietly from saint to saint, from exorcists to spiritual directors, all emphasizing the importance of intentionality in sacred objects. For Padre Pio, the rosary was never merely an object. It was a living companion in spiritual battle, a shield of divine protection, and a channel through which God's grace could flow even when the believer was unaware. He often reminded those who sought his counsel that the small acts of reverence, the quiet choices made in the privacy of one's home, carry a spiritual weight far beyond their apparent simplicity. December, in particular, he would say, is a time when the veil between the material and spiritual worlds feels especially thin, a season when hearts are naturally open to the joy and peace of Christ, and the placement of sacred objects can amplify the blessings of the coming Christmas season. Most people think of the rosary purely as a tool for prayer, reciting Hail Marys and meditating on the mysteries of Christ's life. Yet Padre Pio emphasized that it continues its work even after prayer has ended. Its presence in the room, its careful placement, and the devotion with which it is handled all send a silent message to heaven. Where it rests matters. He recounted stories from his ministry of families who experienced persistent unease, unexplained anxieties, or disturbances during the night. Often the solution was not elaborate rituals or extraordinary prayers, but the simple, intentional placement of a rosary, a small act that opened the door for God's peace to enter their home. For him, the rosary was not passive. It was alive with prayer, and when treated with reverence, it became a silent intercessor, continuously pleading for protection and grace even as the faithful slept. Many Catholics might wonder whether such attentiveness is necessary, or whether it borders on superstition. To this, Padre Pio would respond with gentle firmness. This is not superstition but reverence. The Church has long taught that sacramentals, holy objects such as rosaries, crucifixes, and holy water, are instruments through which grace is mediated, preparing the faithful to receive God's blessings and enabling cooperation with divine providence. The Catechism reminds us that sacramentals are instituted for the sanctification of life, for the enhancement of prayer, and for the sanctification of everyday actions, c. 1670. It is within this framework that the careful placement of the rosary must be understood. It is a devotional act that opens a pathway for grace, aligning the home, the soul, and the spiritual forces of heaven and earth in harmony. The principle is biblical. In the book of Exodus, God gave meticulous instructions to Moses regarding the placement of objects in the tabernacle. Each item had its ordained position: the ark, the lampstands, the altar. Nothing was left to chance. These details were not simply about order or aesthetics. They reflected a deeper spiritual truth. When something is treated with intentionality and care, it becomes a dwelling place for the divine. Padre Pio would often remind his spiritual children that our homes can be like miniature tabernacles. The way we treat objects of devotion communicates to heaven, whether we recognize their sacredness. The night, in particular, is a moment of vulnerability. As the body rests, the soul remains alert, open, and impressionable. In these quiet hours, the faithful are spiritually receptive, and their environment can either nurture divine protection or leave them exposed to subtle disturbances. Saints throughout history understood this truth deeply. They did not regard the rosary as merely symbolic. Padre Pio himself called it his weapon of choice in spiritual combat. Saint Teresa of Calcutta carried hers everywhere, never allowing a night to pass without holding it close. Saint John Bosco instructed his students to keep their rosaries near their hearts as they slept, teaching them that, even in slumber, the soul could participate in prayer and protection. This was not sentimentality. It was recognition of the unseen battles that continue while the world sleeps. The rosary was a conduit of divine intervention, a tangible expression of God's providence, and a silent guardian against spiritual disruption. During December, these lessons take on added significance. The month invites reflection on the mystery of Christ's incarnation, the celebration of his birth, and the opening of hearts to receive grace in abundance. Padre Pio taught that the faithful could harness this spiritual season by simple, deliberate acts of devotion, such as where the rosary rests at night. He often counseled that placing the rosary near the center of one's sleeping area, not hidden or tossed aside, creates a spiritual beacon, a point of connection with God, angels, and saints. The intention behind the placement matters. It must be done with love, devotion, and a conscious desire to invite God's protection into the home. When done correctly, this small act can bring peace, diminish anxiety, protect against spiritual disturbances, and even enhance one's receptivity to dreams, insights, and consolation from the Holy Spirit. Countless souls have testified to the efficacy of such simple practices. Families who follow this guidance often report nights of deep. As the faithful approach Christmas, the placement of the rosary becomes even more profound. It is not merely an object to be respected, but a symbol of Christ himself, whose birth we celebrate, entering the world to bring light, peace, and redemption. Keeping the rosary intentionally near one's sleeping area during this holy season aligns the household with the themes of readiness, expectation, and receptivity that mark the Advent and Christmas periods. It reminds the soul that God's presence is not distant, but near, active, and attentive to even the smallest gestures of devotion. When we place our rosary with care, it becomes a silent prayer, a steady guardian, and a beacon of God's presence. It carries forward the lessons of saints, the wisdom of Scripture, and the profound spiritual intuition of Padre Pio. In the stillness of night, as sleep overtakes the body, the soul receives the benefits of this deliberate act, protection, peace, and spiritual readiness. The smallest details, he insisted, often hold the greatest significance in our spiritual lives. It is not the grandeur of the act, but the love and intentionality behind it that invite God to dwell more fully among us. So this December, as the world prepares to celebrate the birth of Christ, consider the quiet power of your rosary at night. Place it with care, with devotion, and with faith. Let it rest near you, in a position that is intentional and reverent. Allow it to intercede for you as you sleep, inviting the angels, saints, and the Spirit to surround you and your home with protection, peace, and divine blessing. In this simple act, centuries of wisdom converge with the present moment, offering a tangible way to participate in God's grace during the season of Christmas, just as Padre Pio guided countless souls to do during his remarkable life. Remember, your home can be a sanctuary, your night a time of spiritual renewal, and your rosary a steadfast companion. What seems like a small choice, where to lay your rosary, can ripple into profound blessings, transforming your nights into a time of prayer, protection, and preparation for the joy of Christ's birth. In honoring the sacred, you honor the God who dwells among us, and in doing so, you open yourself to the fullness of his love, peace, and Christmas blessings this December. As the nights grow longer in December and the chill of winter settles over the world, many souls unknowingly drift into sleep unprotected by spiritual vigilance. Padre Pio often reminded his followers that while our bodies rest, the spiritual world remains alert, and the soul continues to perceive, sense, and receive influences both divine and otherwise. The quiet hours of darkness, he would say, are not empty. They are charged with the unseen currents of grace and spiritual challenge alike. It is precisely during these hours that the Rosary, placed with care and intention, becomes a silent sentinel, a bridge between heaven and the resting soul. Many have asked him, does it really matter where the Rosary is kept? Can a mere string of beads influence the night? To this, Padre Pio would smile and respond, it is not the beads that carry power, but the reverence with which they are treated, the devotion with which they are placed, and the intention with which the heart prays. He emphasized that small, deliberate acts of piety often shape the spiritual climate of our homes far more profoundly than grand gestures. A rosary left haphazardly may be safe in its own right, but one placed with love, devotion, and attention invites a tangible flow of grace into the household. It speaks to the angels, signaling readiness to receive divine protection and blessing. December, he taught, is particularly significant because it is the month in which the Church commemorates the preparation for Christ's birth. It is a time of expectation, hope, and reflection, a season when heaven itself seems to lean closer to earth. By placing the Rosary near the bed, at the center of the room, or in a place where it can be honored and seen, the faithful align themselves with the spiritual rhythms of the season. Padre Pio insisted that this is not merely symbolic, it is participatory. In these small, intentional acts, one cooperates with the grace that flows from heaven, echoing the care with which God prepared the tabernacle and the holy objects within it centuries ago. Throughout his life, Padre Pio witnessed countless examples of souls who experienced a transformation simply through attentiveness to the placement of sacred objects. Families who were plagued by restless nights, anxiety, or inexplicable fear often found that by honoring the Rosary with intentional placement, a sense of peace entered their home. The night became a sanctuary rather than a battleground. Sleep became restorative not just physically, but spiritually. The Rosary, he taught, is a living intercessor, praying silently for the soul even as the sleeper dreams, warding off unseen evils, and fostering an atmosphere of divine calm. In his quiet moments of prayer, Padre Pio often reflected on how ordinary habits can either hinder or amplify spiritual life. He would observe that the faithful often underestimate the cumulative effect of their daily practices. Placing the Rosary casually without thought or devotion sends a subtle message to the soul that the sacred is ordinary, that the holy is mundane. But placing it with reverence transforms it. It becomes more than a tool. It becomes a companion, a guardian, a presence of God in the night. For centuries, saints and mystics have known this truth intuitively. Saint Teresa of Calcutta never allowed her Rosary to leave her side at night, understanding that even as she slept, her soul remained vulnerable and receptive. St. John Bosco taught the same principle to children, ensuring that they would be protected by their devotion even while unconscious. During December, this practice carries even more profound spiritual resonance. The Rosary becomes a symbol not only of protection but also of expectation, the expectant heart waiting for the coming of Christ. Padre Pio taught that the placement of the Rosary during these nights is a way to spiritually prepare for the birth of the Savior. By keeping it close, one invites divine attention into one's home, aligning the household with the celestial celebration of Christ's arrival. The simple act of placing the Rosary reverently is both a gesture of devotion and a practical spiritual discipline, anchoring the soul in prayer, even while the body rests. The physical location of the Rosary matters, but so does the manner in which it is treated. Padre Pio observed that when the Rosary is handled casually, tossed onto a table or stuffed into a drawer, its potential for spiritual intercession diminishes. Yet, when placed with care, folded gently, laid upon a clean surface, positioned with intention, it radiates a quiet spiritual influence. It acts as a beacon for the angels, a silent prayer that speaks to the divine realm on behalf of the sleeper. It conveys the message that this space is sacred, that this soul is ready to receive God's blessings, and that the heart of the household is attuned to heavenly realities. Countless testimonies from those who followed Padre Pio's counsel affirm the profound impact of this practice. Some reported that even their pets seemed calmer. The household felt lighter, and the atmosphere was imbued with an inexplicable sense of serenity. Others described vivid dreams of protection, comfort, or even visits from angels. The Rosary, when placed intentionally, becomes a conduit of grace that works silently but powerfully, fortifying the soul and home against spiritual disturbances and opening a channel for divine peace to enter. For Padre Pio, these principles were not theoretical. They were observed repeatedly in his life of prayer, confession, and ministry. He witnessed how spiritual neglect, even in small matters, could create openings for fear, anxiety, and temptation. Conversely, simple acts of devotion, consistently performed with love and reverence, could fortify the soul, protect the household, and foster an environment conducive to prayer, reflection, and spiritual growth. The Rosary, he emphasized, is a weapon in spiritual warfare, a prayer in motion, a safeguard that functions whether the faithful are awake or asleep. December is particularly suited for such attentiveness because it is a season of divine expectation. The Church teaches that Advent, the period leading to Christmas, is a time of preparation, anticipation, and reflection. By placing the Rosary reverently at night, the faithful participate in the spiritual rhythm of Advent. They cultivate a household atmosphere that mirrors the readiness of the world for Christ's coming. Angels are invited to watch over the home. The Holy Spirit is invited to dwell in the spaces prepared with love. Saints, whose lives were marked by prayer, intercede silently. It is a small daily act that aligns human intention with heavenly activity, creating a sanctuary of grace that extends throughout the household. Padre Pio often encouraged families to treat this practice as a form of spiritual mindfulness. The act of placing the Rosary was not merely functional. It was a moment of prayer in itself, a reflection on the sacredness of the night, the presence of Christ, and the protection afforded by divine intercession. By consciously acknowledging the presence of the Rosary, and by situating it intentionally, the faithful send a signal to the spiritual realm. This is a space of prayer, a home of holiness, a heart open to God's grace. Even for those who live alone, this practice has profound effects. Placing the Rosary reverently near the sleeping area transforms the night from mere rest into a spiritually attentive period. Sleep becomes a time when the soul communes silently with God, when prayers offered during the day continue their work in the unseen realm, and when divine protection is made tangible. The Rosary, once placed with care, acts as a guardian, continuously interceding, silently reciting prayers, and aligning the sleeper with the presence of angels and saints. Throughout his ministry, Padre Pio repeatedly emphasized the transformative power of ordinary acts done with extraordinary love. This principle extends beyond the Rosary to all areas of devotion and spiritual discipline, yet the Rosary at night serves as a clear and simple example of how reverence and intentionality can amplify grace. It teaches that holiness is not confined to grand acts or extraordinary visions, but is cultivated through consistent mindful practices that honor the sacred in everyday life. During December, as Christmas approaches, the stakes feel higher spiritually. The world may be busy with festivities, distractions, and preparations, but the faithful are called to attune their hearts to the true meaning of the season, the coming of Christ into the world. Placing the Rosary reverently each night is a small yet powerful act that cultivates readiness, peace, and receptivity. It allows the home to reflect the order, beauty, and holiness found in the tabernacle of old, and it invites divine blessing into every corner of life. The Rosary thus becomes more than a string of beads. It becomes a living, breathing intercessor. Its placement at night is an act of intentional devotion that resonates with heaven, a silent prayer that speaks louder than words, and a source of spiritual comfort that carries the faithful through the darkness into light. By embracing this simple practice, souls are fortified, homes are sanctified, and the blessings of Christmas are made tangible in ways that transcend human understanding. As the faithful continue to honor Padre Pio's guidance this December, they discover that the smallest choices often yield the most profound results. The placement of a rosary near the bed, positioned with reverence, transforms ordinary nights into encounters with grace. It cultivates peace, invites divine protection, and fosters a readiness for Christ that mirrors the anticipation of Advent. Each night becomes an opportunity for spiritual renewal, a continuation of prayer, and a tangible expression of devotion that resonates beyond the physical into the eternal. By observing this practice, the faithful participate in a sacred rhythm established by centuries of saints, mystics, and spiritual guides. They align themselves with the spiritual truths that Padre Pio embodied, that intentional acts of devotion, no matter how small, carry eternal significance, that the night is not empty but charged with spiritual reality, and that the faithful, through reverence and love, can draw heaven closer to earth. The rosary, resting intentionally at night, becomes a constant companion, a guardian of the soul, and a channel of Christmas blessings, illuminating even the darkest hours with the light of God's grace. As December nights deepen and the quiet of winter settles over homes, the soul becomes more aware of the sacredness of its surroundings. Padre Pio often reminded the faithful that the night is a sacred arena, a space where both grace and spiritual challenge coexist. The placement of the rosary, he taught, is not merely a matter of habit, but a reflection of the heart's devotion and awareness of God's presence. When the rosary is positioned with intention, near the bed, at the center of a room, or on a place where it can be both honored and seen, it transforms into more than beads and prayers. It becomes a vessel of protection, a silent intercessor, and a spiritual anchor. In these hours, as the body rests, the soul remains vigilant, receptive, and profoundly impressionable. Every movement, every placement of a sacred object sends a message to heaven. Padre Pio observed that homes where the rosary was treated with reverence often radiated peace, a calm that was perceptible not only to the inhabitants, but also to visitors, a tranquility that seemed to extend beyond human understanding. He explained that the faithful do not merely place the rosary for themselves, they create a space where angels, saints, and divine protection can reside. It is a practice that invites the supernatural into the ordinary, the sacred into the mundane, and God's presence into every corner of the household. For those who embrace this discipline during December, the month becomes a spiritual canvas, each night a brushstroke of devotion, anticipation, and preparation for the coming of Christ. The significance of this practice reaches beyond mere protection or comfort. It is a lesson in intentionality, in honoring the sacred, and in cultivating an environment attuned to grace. Padre Pio taught that every act of reverence carries spiritual weight, shaping not only the present moment, but also the soul's trajectory. By keeping the rosary close and treated with devotion, one aligns oneself with centuries of saints who understood that holiness is cultivated in consistency, attentiveness, and love. The rosary becomes more than an object. It becomes a teacher, a guide, and a witness to the faithfulness of those who use it. It reminds the soul that God is present even when unseen, that protection is active even when imperceptible, and that grace flows to those who prepare the way through small acts of devotion. As December unfolds, these nights become opportunities for spiritual awakening, quiet reflection, and intimate communion with God. Each night spent honoring the rosary is an invitation for heaven to intervene in the small, ordinary details of life, transforming anxiety into peace, restlessness into calm, and ordinary sleep into a profound encounter with the divine. The faithful learn that their devotion does not end when their prayers conclude. It continues through intentional care of sacred objects, the silent attention of the heart, and the quiet acts of love that define a life lived in accordance with God's will. And so, as the month of December draws us closer to the miracle of Christmas, the faithful are called to remember the simple yet profound lessons of Padre Pio. The rosary, placed with reverence at night, becomes a beacon of hope, a source of comfort, and a channel of divine blessings. It reminds us that sanctity is not measured solely by grand acts or extraordinary visions, but by the consistency, attentiveness, and love embedded in the small practices of daily life. When treated with devotion, the Rosary speaks for us, intercedes for us, and connects us to the eternal truths of faith. It offers protection in times of spiritual challenge, cultivates peace in moments of anxiety, and deepens the soul's awareness of God's presence in both the mundane and the miraculous. By embracing this discipline, especially during December, the faithful prepare themselves to fully receive the joy, peace, and blessings of Christmas. In conclusion, the placement of the Rosary is more than a ritual. It is a reflection of the heart's orientation toward God, a silent offering of devotion, and a deliberate invitation for grace to enter our lives. Padre Pio reminds us that the spiritual world is always active, that our souls are always listening, and that the smallest acts of reverence can have profound, lasting effects. This December, as we prepare to celebrate the birth of Christ, let us treat our rosaries with love, intention, and devotion. Let every bead be a prayer, every placement a testament to our faith, and every night a sanctuary for the soul. In doing so, we invite the angels to watch over us, the saints to intercede on our behalf, and God Himself to dwell within the spaces we inhabit. May our homes be filled with peace, our hearts with joy, and our souls with the quiet certainty that we are never alone. Let this season of anticipation and preparation be marked by intentional devotion, and let the simple act of placing our rosary reverently guide us to a deeper communion with God. As you rest tonight and every night this December, remember that the Rosary is more than a symbol. It is a living companion, a silent intercessor, and a channel of blessings. Treat it with love, keep it close, and allow it to guide your soul into the peace and protection that Padre Pio so fervently advocated. Let it remind you that even in the stillness of night, you are surrounded by grace, watched over by angels, and embraced by the love of Christ. This Christmas season, may every bead, every prayer, and every act of reverence become a testament to your faith, a source of comfort for your soul, and a beacon of blessings for your home. Allow the quiet power of devotion to transform your nights, fortify your spirit, and open your heart fully to the miracle of Christ's birth so that you may greet Christmas morning with peace, joy, and a soul fully attuned to the love and grace of God.